Members, good afternoon. We've received apologies from Michael Copeland and from David McElveen, and I understand Jimmy Spratton may be late.
It's slightly late, yeah.
But is anticipated. Any other apologies? Members, so you will be aware that Alex Atwood's mother passed away in the early hours of last Thursday morning, and the funeral was on Monday. So, on behalf of the committee, I just want to put on record our condolences to Alex and his wider family circle. And members, I take it you would wish me as chair to write to Alex in those terms. Thank you. At page 6 of your packs, members, there's information on the latest event organised by the Chairs Forum, and this is a breakfast briefing with Esmond Burney, who's the chief economist with PwC and a former MLA, of course. It's on Wednesday, the 27th of May. And a list of all future events is available on the next page, page 7. Could I ask members to respond directly if they wish to attend. At page 9, members, an invitation and information about a public lecture hosted by Ulster University, which is entitled "What is Required for Effective Redress for Historical Institutional Abuse?" And that's in June, Monday the 15th. Again, could I ask you to respond directly. And then at page 5 of table papers, members, there's a news release from the Historical Institutional Abuse Inquiry in which they have indicated that a further 3 institutions are going to be added to the list of the 13 establishments which were originally announced for investigation in September 2013. And there's also a specific further module of the inquiry examining issues arising from the actions of Father Brendan Smith, but only insofar as these relate to the inquiry's terms of reference. So, members, we have come to a position which I had signalled, I think, right at the beginning. We've got a position where there may be 2 boys who were abused. Boy A in an institutional setting in the morning by Brendan Smith. Boy B in a domestic setting by Brendan Smith in the afternoon. Boy A has recourse to the Historical Institutional Abuse Inquiry. Boy B does not. I think that is just grossly unfair, because the defining difference has become the location, the geographic location at which the abuse occurred, not the nature of the abuse.
Yeah, I wholly agree, Chair. If memory serves me right, our expeditious support of the establishment of these terms of reference for this inquiry was prefaced on the face that OFM DFM would conduct some work to communicate to us how exactly Boy B in the non-institutional setting would have recourse to inquiry as well. And as far as I'm aware, the update in relation to work of that nature has been limited, if anything at all. And
we have the extension to the inquiry, so consideration of what may happen next is inevitably delayed. Members, could I propose that we write to the department saying that we've noted this extension in the scope, or sorry, not in the scope, in the number of modules, including Brendan Smith, that this takes us back to the point about what about those who are abused in non-institutional settings, and we would look forward to hearing the First Minister and Deputy First Minister discuss this when they come to their next briefing with us, which should be before recess. Would that be a reasonable way forward?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Are you also content to write to Sir Anthony, the chair of the HIA, to ask whether the addition of these institutions will require a further extension to the timeline of the inquiry, also about any anticipated additional costs, and just to confirm the terms of reference dictate the extent to which he investigates Father Brendan Smith. Okay, thank you. Members, a list of committee's current invitations on page 11. Next, it's the draft minutes of our meeting of the 13th of May. They begin at page 14 of your meeting packs. Are members content to agree the draft minutes? Thank you. As to matters arising, last week we considered correspondence from the Health Minister outlining his concerns about the Children's Services Cooperation Bill. Are members content that we share that correspondence with the Health Committee? Thank you. You'll be aware the ad hoc committee examining the NIPSO bill is due to report by June the 30th. Given the limited time for that committee to consider the bill, Are members content to share relevant papers as required? For example, the summary of responses to our consultation. Thank you. Next, members, page 21, the list of outstanding correspondence. In the absence of any comment on that, I refer you to correspondence summary sheet, page 24. That's all correspondence since the last meeting. Can I just draw your attention to a letter from the department? It's at page 49, and it indicates that FM and DFM have directed that it proceed to dispose of the Shackleton site at Ballykelly as soon as possible, and that decision has been endorsed by the executives. By the executive, singular. Any other comments, members? And in that case, with your agreement, can I refer you to the draft forward work programme at page 122 of your packs? Any proposed amendments or comment? No? Okay. We'll move on to our first briefing of the day. It's from the recently appointed Northern Ireland Commissioner for Children and Young People, Kula Suma. The Commissioner will be joined by Nicky's Chief Executive, Mairead McCafferty. In your packs, you've got the clerk's brief at page 51. A briefing paper from Nicky, along with the most recent Article 24 report, begins at page 53. And we welcome Mairead and Kula to committee. Mairead and Kula, you're very welcome. Kula, I assume you will take an opportunity for some opening remarks.
Well, thank you, and just firstly to thank the committee for taking the time to see us today. I know this isn't the first time I've been before most of you. Some of you may remember I was here with another colleague on the 15th of April to talk about Private Members' Bill and Children's Services Cooperation, and also took the opportunity to regale you with my views on age discrimination legislation. But we were keen to have this meeting and to talk to you today about being the Children's Commission and what our priorities are going forward and how we hope to be able to work with you over the 4 years of my term. You will have had a paper. So just to introduce, this is Mairead McCafferty, who's the Chief Executive of Nicky. And we'll give evidence together. But I'll just very quickly do some introductions. We sent forward a paper outlining some of the issues we wish to talk about, and you may have seen in some of the things that have already come out of Nicky that we've identified some priorities for my 4-year term, which, alongside the full implementation of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child across all government structures and decision-making processes, I also hope to be able to address 3 particular areas: education inequalities, child poverty, and the provision of services concerning child and adolescent mental health and well-being. The call to focus, some of the work of Nicky has been loud and strong, but will inevitably result in lots of people being disappointed. But I hope, under our general work of scrutinising government's work with regards to children and young people, we'll be able to cover the broader range of issues. In the paper that we submitted, we talked about a number of issues, and the first 2 you will see is with regarding to public sector reform and the review of the Nicky legislation. And if I may, I'm going to take these 2 issues together. Back in when the Northern Ireland Commissioner for Children and Young People legislation was passed, all the legwork for that legislation was undertaken by this Assembly, but was finally passed in the UK Parliament. Article 24 of the legislation made provision for its review in no more than 3 years. This was done in 2007 and then again in 2013 by my predecessor. But as yet, nothing has been done with the recommendations that Patricia Loosley-Mooney made in 2013. And I wish to place on record that I fully endorse those recommendations. And it's those recommendations that I wish to take forward in deliberations with OFM, DFM and with yourselves. The three areas, there's comprehensive work being done on the review of the Children's Commissioner's legislation, but the three areas I want to talk to you about is how to make the body international standards compliant. A body such as NICI needs to be wholly independent of government, yet allow itself to be scrutinised by, to come under scrutiny with regard to its effectiveness and its expenditure of public funding. So we believe that it's not appropriate to be assigned to one government department, albeit one as we have at the moment, which is in the centre. And we think that in order for us to maintain a wholly independent remit, that it's appropriate for us to be a body of this Assembly. And I think that the work that this committee has done with regards to the Northern Ireland Public Service Ombudsman can apply to a smaller and some would argue less significant body such as NICI. And I'd ask this committee to consider that carefully. The situation around which sponsor department we have comes into sharp focus with the proposals under the reform of public sector, where it is suggested that we move to the Department of Education. We would suggest that would further compromise our independence, because the Department of Education and the education, you're looking at me perplexed, Chair, education as a whole, as a family, is the department that spends the most directly on children and young people and has the most and applies to all children. So it's very much an operational department and services. It is also, because of that very fact, it is also the area, if you put together schools and across the sector, it's also the area where we would have the most complaints and have the most dealings with on an operational level around redressing violation of children's rights. And it just becomes complicated if they are also our sponsor body, and we have to give account for ourselves when we could be viewed as biting the hand that feeds us. I have no doubt that we could manage that, but I don't think it would be a satisfactory arrangement, and I think we would argue that being a body of the Assembly would be a more appropriate arrangement if that could be managed. I'm happy to take questions, or do you want to stop me now and happy?
Well, I'm just thinking that on that logic, and I get your logic,
Oh, good.
the Commission for Victims and Survivors should not be under OFMDFM.
I think I'm only in a position to talk about my own body.
Let's look at what I said as a comment rather than a question.
I think the logic applies to a number of other institutions.
Yes.
Because the Paris Principles do not just apply to the Commissioner for Children. Another area for legislative change that we're asking to the NICI legislation is to have victim status. And again, I don't want to go on too much about legal detail, but Article 14 of, now I will, Article 14 of our legislation empowers the Commissioner to bring, intervene or assist in legal proceedings where a child or children's rights have been breached. Unfortunately, in order to do that, we need leave to appeal from the court, and the courts have said on numerous occasions, unless we have an actual child victim, we cannot take a case to the court, i.e. we can't be recognised as speaking on behalf of a child or a group of children. We would argue that this places undue pressure on a vulnerable child and their family to take legal proceedings when we would have a body of evidence of where there are particular violations. Also, there is again precedent in Northern Ireland to readdress this issue when in 2007 the Human Rights Commission had their legislation amended to give it victim status. So instead of us taking several individual cases for children, which I would argue is an inefficient way of doing it, we could take a case on behalf of a group of children experiencing breaches of their rights in our own name, and that keeps children and their families. That doesn't mean they have the added stress of being involved as witnesses or whatever in court proceedings. That's an area that we think, based on the precedent already set for the Human Rights Commission, that could be resolved for us as well. And finally, on our legislation, and just to reiterate, what we're asking is to engage in a conversation with the department around the two reviews that have been submitted by the office. Finally, in the legislation, there is a number of duplication clauses, which again, which refers to a substantial part of our powers, namely to assist in relation to legal proceedings, to investigate and review relevant complaints, advocacy and inspection procedures, and to undertake investigations. We can't do any of those things if there's another body who has authority to do so. What that's meant is, particularly where there's been cross-departmental or cross-sectorial issues, we've been thwarted. I think that, so we're not asking for increased powers, we're asking for a duplication clause to be removed to give us the powers that we believe this Assembly intended for us in the early part of the century. So that's some of the structural issues that we will be working on. Also, just moving forward, in May 2016, the UK government will be reporting to the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child on its progress against its implementation of the UNCRC. Nikki will be submitting a report at the beginning of July along with our 3 Commissioner colleagues across the water, and we will be identifying a range of issues that we think are relevant for children across the UK, but also specifically for Northern Ireland. We'll also be raising issues with regards to the concluding observations that were made by the UN Committee in 2008. Some of the issues we'll be addressing with the committee will be the segregation of our education system and academic selection, the physical or corporal punishment of our children, improving outcomes for our looked after children, the provision of child-centred child and adolescent mental health, child poverty, particularly our likely failure to meet the 2020 Child Poverty Act requirements, ensuring equal access to education generally and services specifically for our disabled children, and of course, something that's a very hot topic for us at the moment, the lack of age discrimination protection for children and young people. And I have talked to you about that before, and I'm very happy to take questions on that, because I'm sure we're likely to engage with this quite a lot of it in the next several weeks, months probably. So that's some of the things that we'll be doing with colleagues across the water, and also down south with Noel Muldoon, but also on an international stage. And we will be in Geneva in the autumn discussing some of our recommendations. This brings me to the relationship with you, with this committee. It's our job as this government's children's rights advisors to give you advice with regards to the children's rights implications of your work, hopefully to support you in your work to scrutinise government, but also as a body currently of OFM-DFM to be scrutinised by you. And I am very, very open to that sort of relationship, almost two-way scrutiny. I think it's only right that £1.3 million spent on Nikki is accounted for with regards to its impact, to our impact and what we're doing to improve the lot of children and young people. And similarly, that I am able to ask questions about how our government is implementing the rights of its children and young people. So that's as much as I'm going to say as opening remarks, and I'm hoping that that will elicit the conversation going forward. But we're here really to have a conversation, a discussion with you about the next 4 years.
Okay, thank you, Gurlath. You've certainly given us enough for a conversation. I suppose the first one was the one where I expressed a little bit of visual surprise, is this idea that you're not entirely content with the proposal that your sponsor department becomes the Department of Education. Why do you think the concept of biting the hand that feeds you would be stronger with that relationship than OFM-DFM when they're simply all part of the executive?
Yeah, I suppose one of the concerns that we've discussed has been the fact that it would be a single ministerial department, whereas the one that we are currently housed with is obviously the joint ministerial department, so there would be that added concern that you would be working to one minister. The other concern would be around budgets as well, because we're aware that obviously with all of the cuts that all the government departments are currently experiencing, we could in a sense be at the mercy of budget cuts as well. We are currently making cuts based on what we've been required to do in terms of making savings for this financial year. and that, like every other ALB, is causing us great problems, as you can imagine. We are very concerned that we would get to a stage where the legislative remit of the office could potentially be compromised by being with a single ministerial department. It is no reflection on individual ministers, I have to say. It is just the concern. And it's also, as the Commissioner has already expressed, very much in line with the direction of travel in which we'd like to go, which is very much about looking at the independence of the office more effectively, while at the same time being accountable. Because in no way do we think we should not be accountable for public monies. We are completely open to that, as the Commissioner has said.
Okay, but the principle, if we accept that as a committee, would have implications for other ALBs.
Probably. But
Well,
that's
certainly,
your.
absolutely.
But bearing in mind that this recommendation was in both the 2007 and 2013 review of the legislation, that we wanted, that it was felt based on independent advice that NICI should be a body of the Assembly. It's not new. It's just become, in our view, a bit more urgent now that we're being asked to go into a more operational department.
Okay. If you became an institution of the Assembly, what are the practical implications? For example, where would you get your budget?
Well, one assumes the budget would come with us to the Commission. These are some of the technicalities that have to be resolved.
The Assembly Commission?
Presumably, in the same way as NIPSO.
Yeah.
We're looking to reflect what's happening to NIPSO. It also reflects what the arrangements for our colleague in Scotland. The Scottish Commissioner is a body of the Scottish Parliament.
Okay.
As all eyes turn to Scotland.
And who would you report to? Who would be your scrutiny committee?
Well, that would be, as the Commissioner has already said, that would be very much up for discussion, because we've already met with the Speaker of the Northern Ireland Assembly just to raise concerns. We have also registered these concerns with the DE Minister as well, having had a meeting with him too. I think the practical outworkings of this is something that we're very keen to engage on. And you're right, there would be and potentially could be implications for other ALBs. At the same time, as the Commissioner has already said, this was one of the recommendations when the office and the legislation was reviewed twice in the past, and we're currently awaiting a response from ministers in relation to the 2013 Article 24 report that was put forward. Had that been acted on then, we probably would not be having this conversation today.
But those recommendations were specific to NICI and not a generic...
Oh yes, it was because NICI's legislation as we're required to do under Article 24.
Just for the NICI legislation. But yes, it could be suggested there's read across, particularly even to the Older Persons Commissioner, but we're not competent to speak about that.
Yeah, and you've spoken to the Speaker?
Yes, we have.
Yes.
How did he react?
He didn't throw us out of his office. I think it was an intriguing...
Sorry, he was?
He didn't throw us out of the office. I think it was an intriguing possibility. He said certainly open to having the conversation. We're not offering a fait accompli. We're not offering one we prepared earlier. I think it's only right that we allow the Assembly to have that, and ministers and the Executive to have that debate.
On the theme of inaction, it appears your first Article 24 report, which was submitted to OFMDFM in 2007, has not yet had a response. Is that correct?
This is why we were required to carry out another review of the legislation, which NICI did, and that report was submitted along with the Article 24 report again in 2013.
And what was the response to 2013?
We have just recently received a letter from the First and Deputy First Minister's office, and we have a meeting scheduled for the 2nd of June to discuss this further.
So something that started in 2007.
2013 is when the legislation passed.
Yeah, but the first Article 24 was 2007. There was no response. You did another one in 2013, and you are yet to have a meeting about it.
It has been raised and been on the agenda of all of the meetings that we've had with the junior ministers and with the OFMDFM officials as well. But we have expressed concern at the delay in a response.
Right. How do you think children and young people would react if they knew that?
I think children and young people have got a lot of things to worry about, but I do think there's an issue about and I think HGFS is an example of this, of how the messages our government is sending to its children and young people with regards to their rights.
Why does that surprise you, Chair? We see them once a year.
Would you consider their response timely
What was the response from...
to your Article 24 report?
No, I wouldn't consider it timely. Bearing in mind I've only been the Commissioner since the 2nd of March of this year, which is why we have taken the opportunity of our first meeting with you to raise it with us. And I am really, really pleased that we are having a meeting with the First and Deputy First Minister in June. So for me, 3 months in, I consider it a success that we've at least got this on the table for a discussion.
Okay. Let's move on to the legal proceedings that you made, Kura. Am I right in understanding that you can support an individual child or young person in the same way the Equality Commission recently...
In certain circumstances,
Right.
yes. In
the same way as that case that was where we got a result yesterday, you can support somebody.
In certain circumstances, yes. But we can't...
You can't own initiate.
No. So, for example, if there was a group of children not receiving a certain service, say there was a group of children ending up in custody unnecessarily, and there was a very clear breach, I wouldn't be allowed, obviously with my colleagues in Nikki, to take a case and say, here is evidence, there are 50 kids experiencing this issue. I wouldn't be allowed to do that.
But you could support one child out of the 50.
But you would have to subject that child to the court proceedings, yes.
Right.
And then the next one coming along after them, and then the next one coming along after them.
If you set the precedent with one case, would you really need?
Depends how big the precedent of it, and can and just to share with you, we with the case we were involved in, had a significant judicial review outcome in relation to children being given reasonable bail, support when on bail, and we are still working with the relevant authorities to implement that ruling. So I think, you know, and there are several more cases going through.
Okay. The other point Mairead's making, of course, is that if you do it, you're not subjecting or exposing the child to the court process.
That's right.
Potential negligence. Have you a legal budget within your overall budget?
Yes.
How much is it?
Currently,
She's a numbers woman.
well, the department has programme costs, as we refer to them as, of around £40,000, 30 to £40,000, which is currently being reviewed given some of the pressures around the organisation.
But we also employ 3 qualified lawyers,
Right.
a barrister and 2 solicitors.
As a percentage of programme costs, what does law add
I
up
would
to?
say about 30-35%.
Oh, quite high then.
In terms of the programme costs, in terms of staffing, it would be much less because we only have 5 staff in that department out of a complement of 25. So you're talking what, 20%, 25%.
Right. And of the 5, 3 are qualified.
3 are qualified solicitors and 1's a barrister.
Okay. You also mentioned the UN, the CRC Convention on the Rights of the Child. In benchmarking terms, can you give us an idea of how we do here compared to the Republic and the other nations and regions of the UK?
Well, there are, as you know, moves in Scotland and Wales to look at better incorporation of child's rights compliance in relation to the UNCRC. And there's the Scotland Bill and the Welsh measure as well have made significant progress in those areas. And it is something that we are in discussions with. We did bring the commissioners over from Scotland, Wales and the Republic of Ireland and England in 2012 just to update this jurisdiction on the progress that they've made. We're aware that there are some issues that they're resolving currently in Wales, for example. But it is something that Nikki has put on its programme for a while now. And for all of the reasons the Commissioner's already outlined, it is something that we're working towards, while we appreciate it as a longer-term piece that we will have to see achieved.
Can I just say it's very difficult to compare across the 5 jurisdictions, mainly because data collection with regards to the state of well-being and children's rights is not as robust here in Northern Ireland as we would like it to be, nor is understanding how much money is spent on the budgetary spend for our children and young people. And that's another piece of work we're taking forward and hope to launch in October in order to inform the conversations around comprehensive spending review and the programme for government. But can I just say to you that I, as your Commissioner for Children, am not overly interested in comparing myself to any of the nations on these islands. I'm interested in comparing us to the best in the world. because I think and lots of people smile at me going, bless. It's not it's an aspiration, but if we can do that and get on that journey, it may not happen during my tenure, but I think the peculiarities of Northern Ireland in its size lend us to actually looking beyond these shores and looking to what the best are able to do for their children and getting on that journey. And just to say, before I finish, that the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child is supposed to be minimum standards, and yet we're still having conversations this many years in on even achieving them.
Who is best in the world?
There's a whole heap of countries best in the world, and I'm loath to say the F word, which is Finland. There are a lot of countries that have a lot to teach us, but we know that some of the Far Eastern countries are best in the world, but it's mainly the Nordic and the Scandinavian countries who appear towards the top of the league tables around education and well-being and happiness.
Right, if the best in the world are 10 out of 10, what do we score currently?
Well, we know that the UK often appears towards the bottom of the tables.
So in your own mind, if 10 out of 10 is perfect, what score would you give us?
Oh my goodness. I'm not a teacher. Social worker, we don't score. I would say we were probably 3 or 4, 2 or 3. 2 or 3, would that be fair enough?
As a former teacher, I'll be more generous and say probably 5. I do think we have a way to go, and I do think, and back to your earlier question around what do you think children and young people would think of the fact that we haven't had the review of our legislation addressed, for example. I think it's very concerning, the message that we send to our children and young people currently. And as the Commissioner's already said, Age GFS is one example of that, because we're saying to our children and young people, you don't matter. We don't care enough to have you included in a piece of legislation. And that is a very dangerous message. One of the most worrying things in our society, as we are all aware, is the levels of disaffection of members of this society. And if we put forward a piece of legislation such as HGFS, which effectively excludes under 16s, we are saying to a whole swathe of young people upcoming in this society that they're not valued enough or respected enough to be included. And I might revise my earlier mark and go back down to a 4.
Yeah, I was right in the first place.
Okay. Before we degenerate into the Eurovision Song Contest, let's bring in Alex Maskey.
That's not right for Cyprus.
Thank you for your presentation. I'm sort of tempted to say that you could merge both the children and older persons, Commissioner, since by the time you get a response back, some of the younger people will be older people. But anyway,
I certainly will be.
you have explained that you have had a number of meetings, so unless that's something that's skipped my attention, what you're saying is you haven't had a formal response back since 2007 and again 2013, I find just incomprehensible. But you have said that you have had a number of engagements with the department.
Yes.
In fact, I've heard just coming on your predecessor come and explain about some of those engagements, including with junior ministers. So what would have been the content of the substance of those, just to remind us, because we haven't had a formal response. Has there been something else going on? I'm trying to imagine it's been 0 since 2007 and 13. I find, as I said earlier on, incomprehensible and absolutely unacceptable. But if you have had meetings and discussions, is that where the response has been?
We haven't had.
forthcoming, or-
We've had, as Mairead has said, and have a look. On a quarterly basis, we have formal meetings with officials in the department, and also then we meet, probably 2 or 3 times a year regularly, certainly with the junior ministers, to look at the work of the office and the work progressing on children and young people's issues. But I think I'm right in saying we've not had formal discussions with regards to the review of the legislation, except to say we've received it and it's being considered. Is that...
Well, in fairness, it has been on the agenda of the meetings with the junior ministers, and we have discussed it, but we haven't had a formal response to it. There are 12 recommendations, as you'll be aware, in the Article 24 report, and we have had brief discussions on some aspects of those, but as yet we haven't had the formal response. And one of the main ones, as the Commissioner's already said, is around the need not to have victim status to be able to take class actions on behalf of groups of children and young people, and also the duplication and contradictory clauses that exist, and also practical considerations, for example, like the devolution of policing and justice now means that we have to just amend a paragraph to reflect that. So practical things like that would have to be done, but it shouldn't be too onerous a task. to amend the legislation, and we've been very patient.
So the point I'm trying to get at, you have had some discussions on some of those issues, but
Yeah.
no resolution to
No
any of
response,
them.
No.
no formal response.
And any suggested time frame, has been any indication in those discussions that there's some resolution to it, or is it just talking?
Well, the letter that we recently received from the First and Deputy First Minister's office, and we're having a meeting about on the 2nd of June, actually refers to the victim status issues. So that's obviously one of the issues we'll be discussing further when we meet with them.
I've discussed it before.
We've discussed it, but we've had no formal written
yeah.
response to it.
What's the difference between a formal response and
Some sort of plan about what you're going to
answer.
do with the information.
Yeah.
No, it's all well and good discussing it, but we need some plan. Either to say, no, we've had a look at what you've said and we don't agree with you, so then you know the parameters of the conversation you're having. The impression I'm getting, bearing in mind I've only been at this for a few months, the impression I'm getting is there's been discussions, but that it's not been taken forward one way or the other. And what we need is something to be taken forward.
now and again there we've had officials who've had to come here and say, look, listen, the problem, there's a political non-agreement, there's no agreement politically. So we all understand what that means. Is that what's been happening? Because I don't know. We'll find out, but is that what's happening?
I'm aware the first time the review was conducted that there hadn't been political agreement over a response letter to the Commissioner then. It was slightly before my time, but this is what I understand. Because so many years had elapsed, then the Commissioner was asked to conduct another review, which we did, and that resulted then in the 2013 report and the Article 24 report that was submitted in 2013. I suppose at this stage we would like the formal response, because that would give us an indication of the 12 recommendations, how we can move forward on them, and where the legislation has to be amended and can be amended.
That's fine.
And I suppose essentially just to conclude that by saying the reason that the request and the recommendations number 12 is to make the office more effective for children and young people. This is not about trying to make the Commissioner omnipotent or anything like that. It's actually about making sure that we can do a much more effective job on behalf of the children and young people.
And
for whom
apart
we work.
from asking for victim status, everything else we're asking is simply to reflect what I believe was the intention back in 2002, 2003 when the legislation was drawn up, and I was unfortunately there at the time. I'm old enough, but we were part of the NGO forum that drew up that legislation. So the only significant change we're asking to the legislation is the victim status. The rest is more tidy up.
Right. And that's one of the 12 recommendations?
Yes. It's all in
And
the
just one final point, thanks for that. So, leaving that to one side, and we will obviously do that a lot more substantively, but an ongoing then relationship with the department and getting on with your work and getting whatever support you might need, is any of that productive?
It's getting there. I think with me new in, because one of the things about the Commissioner for Children's office is that it's very much driven by the individual who's in that role as Commissioner. So, in the 3 months, and even from the date of the announcement of my appointment in December, I have had nothing but warm welcomes, and certainly people have been listening to us. Now, as we get into the nitty-gritty and we start actually beginning to make our mark, and push things in certain directions, we'll see how it goes. But as Mairead has said, we have, and we talked about this last time we were here in April, we have significant frustrations in not being able to get a response as to why the direction of travel is as it is under HGFS, regardless of the mountains of evidence to the contrary that Nikki and the Equality Commission submitted in 2013.
I assume you know that's is now.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks very much.
Deputy Chair Chris Little.
Thanks, Chair. Good to see you, and congratulations on the start of the new post. You've said that one of your key priorities are going to be addressing or examining educational inequality, segregation and academic selection. Have you any initial thoughts about what some of the key areas of concern are in relation to those issues?
Just to say, I have some, and I've already talked to about some of that, both in blogs that we've written, in speeches that I've made, and also in media interviews. But just to say that segregation and academic selection were both issues that the UN Committee raised with the UK, in Northern Ireland specifically, that the UN Committee raised in 2008. And we'll be asking the UK government to talk about progress. And as you know, progress is not much further forward. What I'm interested in, Chris, is that the gap in educational attainment amongst certain groups of our children and young people is unacceptable. I think there are some things inherently challenging about our education system. One is with regards to the barriers, real or virtual, that are faced in for children living in poverty, accessing, you know, some of the things that mean that they can enjoy their full rights to education. And we cannot deny that our selective system also has an impact. I cannot sit here or knock on anyone who's interested in children's issues and say that less than 20% of boys, of Protestant boys on free school meals, leave school with good GCSEs A to C in English and maths. That is unacceptable. It becomes even more unacceptable when you compare it to the just under the 79% of Catholic girls who are not on free school meals who leave with those qualifications. It's not right. It's just not right. Now, I know I have said some stuff in the media about ending academic selection, but what I want, actually, it's not for me to make those decisions. It's for this body, for this institution, the Assembly, to make those decisions. But what I think we have to have in the way we're having conversations in our health, for our health service, is have a proper review. The Chief Medical Officer talked about health and said we need a radical overhaul. I would suggest we need the same for our education system. We need a proper conversation and a consensus way forward on how we're going to review our education system and have a system that enables all children to achieve the top end. I'm not asking for meeting in the middle. That's where we're talking about, to quote my colleague, a levelling up of education to achieve the best for all our children. And that we need to, and again I've said this publicly, we need to set aside our preconceptions of what will fix the system. Look at what's best in Northern Ireland, look at what's best in these islands, look at what's best in the world, talk to our children, our young people and their families about what they need, and come up with a system that we can work towards. Academic selection can't be stopped tomorrow because we haven't got an alternative. We need to do that. Sorry, Chris, that was a speech rather than an answer.
I just wonder if you would agree with me. I think one of the problems is, and this isn't just particular to Northern Ireland, that education tends to go for standardisation. You know, 5-star, 5 A-stars, C's. The way to do it is to individualise it. That's the only way you're going to have real success for children. But that's a hugely more challenging way of doing business than standardisation, which is relatively simple.
But if we have a standard, then it's about baselines. And I think that's part of the conversation, because we know, particularly for children who have certain adversities at the beginning of their lives or during their childhood, children who are looked after, children with disabilities, children with illnesses, they're not going to reach that at 16, but they may reach that at 19 or they may reach that at 21, which is why, for example, our remit extends to 21 for children with disabilities and children who are looked after, because they're going to reach those milestones later in order to make up for some of the challenges. But we need to have that conversation, and we need to set aside our vested interests and come to the table open to have that conversation with our society.
Chris, thanks for that.
Yeah, no, I agree with you, Chair, as well. I think you've said before, we assess how intelligent children and young people are against a standard, rather in what way children and young people are talented, and then provide them with the opportunities to develop those talents in whatever way they are. But that is a big challenge to undertake, and I look forward to working with you on those issues and wish you well in them. Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Brenda Hill.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Liz. I suppose going through our briefing notes, it talked about the implementation of the Paris Principles. I'm not really aware fully of what they are, so can you explain exactly what the Paris Principles do? And are your contemporaries in Ireland and UK, are they able to work to them, or is it being implemented there? And if it did happen here, how would it actually benefit children and young people?
It's some of the things we talked about earlier. Paris principles are a set of principles of the Office of Human Rights that the UN came up with, and one of the Paris principles is to be wholly independent. I think the way you're absolutely right to ask the question: if you want this, how is it going to improve things on the ground for children and young people? In order for us to be wholly independent, so we can actually be the genuine advocate for the views and experiences of children, and not to be hamstrung by vested interests of government departments, ministers and civil servants, to have that voice and that advocacy. I don't want to use the word pure, but to be genuine about that. That's not to say that people don't come back, but that we can be true, and that the only customer, if you like, the only stakeholder we need to worry about is children, young people, and actually for Nikki and their parents, that we have to take into consideration the views and experiences of parents as well. But as parents, you know, as often the main advocates for their children. So that's how we think, by being Paris Principle, it will guarantee the independence, but also makes requirements on the government to take into account what we say about the lives of children and young people, and the measures that we're recommending need to be taken in order to improve outcomes for children. So I have said a lot since I started this job for us to be measured on what we achieve for young people. That's what the scrutiny, you know, obviously how we spend our money is very, very important, but the scrutiny needs to be on the outcomes and the quality of the advice we give our government.
Okay, so would you say then that by not adhering to them, the your work is hindered or contaminated by, for the want of a better word, by the other department?
I think contaminates probably, but I think the risk, particularly what Mairead was alluding to, if we move into an operational department in an area like education, I think contamination may become an issue, but certainly we have a feeling of being a little bit hamstrung, yes.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Okay. Just to go back to the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, the UK government is about to put together the latest state party report,
yes,
as it is called, for the UN committee.
Yeah.
Have you had an input yet?
Not into the UK. So what we will be doing, and colleague, the four commissioners of the UK will be submitting their report to there's an alternative reporting process. The UK government have put in their report, and what will happen is the UK commissioners will be submitting their report on the 1st of July, and we can certainly give you early sight of that as soon as possible. And also in Northern Ireland, the NGO sector will also be submitting a report on the state of children's rights in Northern Ireland. So in the autumn, there'll be what's called a pre-sessional event in Geneva, where the UN committee will hear from those of us outside of government, so the four commissioners and other parties as well, to tell us what we think of the UK government's report. And obviously we will be speaking specifically about Northern Ireland, what we think about that.
Great. Okay, so you're happy enough with that?
Well, I'm certainly not happy for the record with the UK government's report, but I'm certainly content enough, and it's the first time for me, that we will have a voice in that process.
Okay,
yes.
well, what is it about the UK government's report that you don't like?
I think when you compare the UK government's report with the alternative reports, it sometimes feels that we have different interpretations of the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. So, for example, there was a recommendation. You're testing my memory here, but there's a recommendation in the concluding observation with regards to taking urgent measures to address the negative stereotyping of children and young people, particularly in the media. This was in 2008. In Northern Ireland, our government responded by saying they'd funded 14 intergenerational projects, and that was the urgent measure that they had taken. So that's just an example. Now, again, for the record, the 14 intergenerational projects they funded were excellent projects that actually achieved a lot in conversations between older people and younger people. But it doesn't, for me, qualify as taking an urgent measure to address the negative stereotyping of children and young people. So it's issues like that. The two recommendations I talked about around education are simply not mentioned in the UK State Party report. Certainly not that I've seen. Again, I'd have to go back and scrutinise it more probably. But they've just chosen not to refer to those concluding observations. So we have a different interpretation. And some of the challenges are that it's written at Westminster. So you wanted to...
No, I was just going to add, I mean, there's obviously, in terms of the UK State Party report, there are clusters of rights under which the UK State Party reports, you know, in terms of things, health, education, youth justice and so on. So they will have made concluding observations last time round, as the Commissioner said, in 2008, and that is what they're reporting on now. Certainly there would be a range of areas where we would not be content with the progress or lack of progress that has been made. So this is why the 4 UK Commissioners are actually doing a joint report again. But obviously there will be Northern Ireland specific recommendations in there as well, coming from the Commissioner. And certainly some of the concluding observations around education, for example, that the Commissioners mentioned, but there were also ones around youth justice, for example, in the length of time that young people were kept on remand. So there's a whole range of issues against which the UK State Party as a whole will be measured, and there are some of the concluding observations.
Okay. Well, as we finish this session, I think we would like to stay in touch, as you suggested, Kula. And perhaps as a next step, once you have your Article 24 meeting, you could write to us or communicate how that has gone on. And perhaps at an appropriate time after your visit to Switzerland, we might think about meeting up again.
We very much welcome that, and also we'll let you have our annual report, and I'm very happy to take any challenge or give further information with anything you think. And would welcome visits. Absolutely. If anyone wants to come and see us individually. You know, you are the committee that should be scrutinising our work, and we're really open for that.
Okay.
Okay.
Kula Murray, thank you. Thank you both very much indeed.
Thank you.
Members, we received a briefing from OFM-DFM officials on the Bright Start childcare strategy back in November. The purpose of today's session is to receive an update, and that comes from officials. Your clerk's brief is available in your packs at page 78. Also available to you, follow-up correspondence dated the 9th of February, responding to queries raised in that November briefing. That's page 80. And at page 118 is follow-up correspondence for a most recent programme for government briefing, which includes information about rural childcare. And finally, a paper from OFM-DFM was received at 2:30 yesterday. So it naturally is in tabled papers at page 10. And we welcome Pauline Donnan and Martin Tyrrell and invite you to make your opening remarks.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, as you say, we last updated the committee in November, and there were a number of requests arising from that meeting, which we've responded to. Also, at the time of that meeting, there was a discussion about tax-free childcare and the outgoing childcare voucher scheme, and we'd agreed to undertake some research looking at the effects of that on parents and if there was any differential impact on parents if one scheme was better or for parents, one or other scheme was better for parents. And that research is at an advanced stage, and Pauline will be able to present some emerging findings from the research this afternoon. I'd like to start by going through the paper that was received, which provides an update on where we are with the childcare strategy. I'll go through the main developments, the first phase, where we are with that, where we are in terms of developing the full final version of the childcare strategy, and then I'll say something about tax-free childcare, and then Pauline will say something about the emerging findings. As you'll know, the first phase of the childcare strategy was launched in 2013, in September 2013, and that included 15 key first actions which were intended to address the main priorities that were emerging from consultation and research that we'd undertaken in 2012. The main need identified at that time, the main need that was coming out through the search findings and then was reinforced by consultation, that was the need for school-age childcare services aimed at the 4 to 14 age group particularly, services like breakfast clubs, after-school clubs and summer schemes. That was where the deficiency of provision appeared to be. We launched three of the key first actions focus on school-age childcare, and they were the most ambitious of the actions, and they're being taken forward through School-age Childcare Grant Scheme, which we launched in March last year. To date, we've had 2 calls for applications under the grant scheme, and that's resulted in 119 applications received, which around 80 were successful, 80 met selection criteria. And on the basis of that, we've awarded close to £3 million, which will be payable over a 3-year period. The successful projects will sustain or create 2,300 school-age childcare places. The majority will be sustained places. These are places that were at risk of being lost if some funding wasn't introduced. 1,600 of the places that are being sustained or created are sustained places, and then the remaining 700 are new places created. We plan to have a 3rd call in the autumn of this year, and that will focus more on new start childcare providers, start-up childcare providers, particularly childcare providers based on school premises, and the preparatory work to animate potential applicants, to interest potential applicants, that will be starting before the end of this month. There's been a series of events set up that will take place in the second half. On the other key first actions, with regard to rural childcare, as you'll know, DARD's analysis, which was carried out after the launch of the first phase of the childcare strategy, DARD's analysis suggested that affordability was a bigger issue than availability of childcare places in rural areas. And on the basis of that, DARD submitted a think piece setting out a number of proposals for childcare actions that might be taken forward by the strategy. Those actions have been incorporated as draft proposals in the draft childcare strategy, which we're hoping to put out to consultation in the next few weeks before the summer. Key First Action 6 made good progress. That's childcare for children with a disability. Grants of £150,000 were allocated, and if that's combined with some of the grants that were awarded before the launch of the first phase during the Executive Childcare Fund stages, around £500,000 has been allocated to childcare projects focusing on the childcare needs of children with a disability. Key First Action 7 and 8 look at information. The Family Support NI website, the childcare element of that website has been developed and enhanced to give better information to parents on the availability and location of childcare services. And that information is now also available as a social media app. That's been available for several months now. With regard to promoting financial assistance and promoting registered childcare, we haven't been able to undertake as ambitious a programme of advertising as we'd first envisaged, and that's due to budgetary constraints. The childcare workforce, DEL, are working to enhance the skills base of the childcare workforce, and that will become more important as we focus on new starts when there will be a need for newly qualified childcare managers and newly qualified childcare professionals. Management of the strategy is continuing via the Childcare Strategy Programme Board, which is chaired by OFM-DFM and includes representatives from all departments with an interest in childcare, and the Childcare Partnerships, who are our delivery body for the School Childcare Grant Scheme. With regard to the full childcare strategy, we've developed a draft strategy on a co-design principle involving childcare stakeholders in the childcare sector. That draft is at an advanced stage, and we hope to proceed to consultation within the next few weeks. It's also taken account of research, some of the research that was undertaken back in 2012, and more recently published research such as the PricewaterhouseCoopers analysis of the cost of comprehensive universal childcare. With regard to the affordability of childcare, which has been a major issue for parents, we have been supporting low-cost childcare settings. All of the settings that have been supported through the School-age Childcare Grant Scheme have been low-cost childcare settings, offering childcare places at significantly below the average cost of childcare here. We also require our assisted childcare settings to promote financial assistance with the cost of childcare among the parents who are using their services, so to undertake one-to-one sessions with parents to alert them to the availability of particular funding streams that they could be using to offset the cost of childcare. and targeting the system of assistance that is most suited to their particular needs. And we've been promoting the financial assistance via the Family Support website. Tax-free childcare is due to come in later this year, sometime in the autumn, and we expect that to offer a more comprehensive range of assistance with the cost of childcare than the outgoing childcare voucher scheme. We think that because eligibility is not dependent on the participation of employers, that's a major factor in deterring a lot of people from using the voucher scheme because their employers are not participating in that scheme. Self-employed parents are eligible for the new tax-free childcare scheme, whereas they're not eligible for the voucher scheme. And also tax-free childcare takes account of the number of children in childcare. So it's not being paid per parent who's in the scheme, it's being paid per child in childcare. So we reckon on account of that, more local parents will benefit under the new scheme. The amount by which they benefit will tend to be greater, and more parents will therefore be able to afford the childcare services they need, and more children will benefit through childcare. More childcare settings as well will be able to achieve sustainability, which is a major goal of our strategy. Parents who are better off under the voucher scheme, they can stay with the voucher scheme. The voucher scheme isn't closing to people who are already in it. It's closing to people it's closing to new entrants. The question of parents being disadvantaged by the new scheme relates solely to parents who might sometime in the future look back at the old voucher scheme, compare it with tax-free childcare and reckon that they would have been better off under the voucher scheme if it had still been in existence. We don't think there will be many parents who can make that comparison and say that the voucher scheme would have been better for them, because the eligibility of vouchers depends on employer participation, which is small. Tax-free childcare pays out more than the voucher scheme in general, and tax-free childcare is paid per child. So we don't think that many people will hypothetically be disadvantaged under the tax-free childcare scheme. Pauline has some emerging findings on that which she'll share with you now.
Okay, thank you. The statisticians in OFM DFM have carried out some analysis to estimate the number of families who'd be better off under the tax-free childcare scheme or the existing childcare voucher scheme. The analysis is under consideration within the department, so unfortunately at this stage I'm limited in what detail I can provide you today. What I can say is that emerging findings show that more families are likely to be better off under tax-free childcare than the childcare voucher scheme. I suppose some of the problems that we've had in trying to carry out the analysis are determining which scheme a family is better off on, because it very much depends on individual circumstances such as the family income and how much each family actually spends on childcare costs, and that information just isn't collated anywhere. So what we have been able to do is make assumptions based on information from the Census of Population, from the Family Resources Survey, the Census of Employment and the Interdepartmental Business Register. And we've been able to look at information such as family composition, including the number and age of parents in each household, and the employment status of those parents and whether they're living in lone parent households or a couple households. So based on this information and looking at the eligibility criteria of each scheme, so far what we found is that the characteristics of families who are likely to be better off on tax-free childcare will include those where there is more than one child aged 0 to 11, where one or both parents are self-employed, and where it's a lone parent family. Generally they're going to be better off under tax-free childcare. And in terms of childcare vouchers then, really it's families who have children aged 12 to 14, so it's over that 0 to 11 age group, because there's no other option available to them. And also families where only one parent is in work, and that's really because of tax-free childcare, both parents have to be in work. But of course with childcare vouchers, as Martin has alluded to, the employer actually has to be in the scheme. So I'm sort of limited in the detail I can provide you with today, but hopefully we'll be able to come back to you with a more detailed paper soon.
Any info on social class?
No, we don't have any information on social class.
Okay.
But Because tax-free childcare, if you're already availing of tax credits, you can't avail of tax-free childcare. So it's more likely that families living in sort of middle, high-level incomes are going to avail of tax-free childcare.
Okay, well, thank you both. I'm just wondering, Martin, how often has this committee heard an official say, we hope to proceed to consultation in the next few weeks, rather than explain why there's a delay? So could I ask you why you weren't out to consultation in March of this year, as previously indicated?
We followed a co-design process that was introduced in the summer of 2014, and developing the draft childcare strategy based on the inputs from the co-design process took longer than we had envisaged, so we didn't have a draft for consultation in March 2015, which is why there has been some delay in proceeding to consultation. At the same time, we've had a lot of valued inputs from childcare stakeholders, the childcare sector, and that has, I think, enabled us to develop a better draft childcare strategy.
You have yet to go to consultation, and yet in your opening remarks you've told this committee that something is, quote unquote, a major goal of our strategy. If you have already decided what your strategy is and what the major goals are, why bother going to consultation?
We launched the first phase of the childcare strategy in September 2013. That first phase has goals, objectives, targets. All of those are being measured and looked at. All of those are being examined to see how we're performing. And part of the process of consultation will be looking back at those goals and saying, are those appropriate? Do they need to be redesigned? Do they need to be redeveloped? So we have goals for the first phase, but those goals are not set in stone. Those goals can be changed. Those goals can be amended on the basis of what people tell us.
If I heard the figures correctly, in the first two tranches you've had 80 successful applications and 39 unsuccessful. Is there a...
Yes, that's right.
How would you characterise the 39 unsuccessful? Are there any trends or particular reasons why applications don't meet the mark?
No particular dominant trend. Some failed because the costs were too high, because we are focusing on low-cost childcare providers who are capable of delivering a childcare service, full wraparound service, at a cost of approximately £70 per week per child. And some of the unsuccessful applicants didn't do that. They didn't have cost data that suggested that they could do it, so they failed on value for money grounds. Others, there were administrative problems with their application forms, which they're now working through with the managing agent with the childcare partnerships. But no particularly dominant reason why people fail to produce applications that met the criteria.
And finally, for now from me, you mentioned key first action 6, which is childcare for children with a disability. You talked about £150,000. I believe there's 60,000 to a peripatetic childcare pilot, 45,000 to a holiday grant scheme, 50,000 to the small grant scheme. Children in Northern Ireland delivering specialist disability awareness training to more than 1,300 childcare staff during the period. All sounds very, very positive, Martin, but yet, due to funding constraints, it's not clear whether further funding will be allocated to this key first action. Yes.
Now, the 150,000 needs to be seen in the context of the Executive Childcare Fund. Overall, £540,000 has been allocated to actions under Key First Action 6, except that some of that was allocated before we called it Key First Action 6, before we launched the first phase.
Okay, but
we would expect for the future that the department that has responsibility for that Key First Action, which is the Department of Health, that they will bid through the normal PE process for the resource to take that forward, and that will be in the June monitoring round.
I just think it's somewhat disturbing that there's any question mark about funding for childcare for children with a disability. However, we shall see how...
Certainly a priority, and it's a priority we would expect to see in the full final version of the childcare strategy when that is launched.
As you say, we'll see what happens in June monitoring, if we ever get there. Jimmy Spratt.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the presentation. Just in relation to the tax-free, which I think you said was coming in later this year.
Yes, the tax-free childcare.
I can recollect in the previous conversations that we've had in relation to this, given the fact that self-employed people are going to be brought into the system now. I recollected one of the issues raised was how awareness would be raised in relation to that. So what has the department done in relation to, I recognise it's an HMRC issue, but in terms of highlighting the fact to perhaps self-employed people that they would be eligible? Has anything been done along those lines? Because it was something I think that, I'm not sure I would go as far as to say you made a commitment, but that you said that it's something that would be looked at the time, is my recollection.
Certainly been looked at. We're working very closely with colleagues in HMRC on that issue, but there is a hold-up on the advertising. There is meant to be a general advertising campaign on the new scheme. My understanding of this is that there is a legal challenge to the delivery body for the scheme. That legal challenge is holding up advertising on tax-free childcare.
Is that on a national context?
That is indeed, yes. National Savings are the designated delivery body for the new scheme, and I believe there's been a legal challenge to their delivery role, and until that is resolved, all advertising is held up.
But obviously, if it's coming in, whenever you said it was coming in later this year, exactly what's later this year?
Well, now, I think the scheme itself could be delayed by the legal challenge. Until that is resolved, the timetable for bringing in the new scheme it cannot be finalised.
These sort of schemes normally start at the beginning of a tax year,
yes.
Which would indicate to me that it would be, you know, we're in a tax year now, so is it more likely to be in the next tax year, which would be next year?
I'm not sure about that. I can't say for certain. Until the new scheme is introduced, the old scheme stands. That will be the case. So there will not be a gap period where the old scheme is gone and the new scheme hasn't been phased.
It'd be worthwhile if we could get clarification on
Certainly
that.
We'll do that. Yes.
How, you know, context of a more regional context, how people could be highlighted here. I understand there might be a national campaign, but someone needs to ensure that there's a local campaign as well.
Certainly will.
Thanks, Chair.
Chris Little, Deputy Chair.
Thanks, Chair. One of the key actions of Bright Start, as you've mentioned, was to aim to sustain or create between 5,000 and 7,000 school-age childcare places. You've helpfully updated us today that 2,300 places have been sustained or created to date. What is the target date for to create or sustain the 5,000 to 7,000 places?
Initially, we've been thinking about a 3-year period. So if you begin from 2014 running through to 2017, 2018, perhaps, to create 5,000 to 7,000 places. But that projection was based on a different financial budgetary context than we have at present. So at the minute, we're working from call to call, and we want to see what the demand is as well. That is always dependent on how many people apply and the quality of those actions. To date, to be open about it, we have had a lot of applications from existing childcare providers and none to date from the New Start childcare providers that we have been hoping to see. So the third call is a critical call for this grant scheme. The third call is the call where we will be examining how much New Start potential there is out there. If we don't get the level of New Start interest, then we'll try to see why that is happening, what is deterring people from being entrepreneurial in the childcare sector.
Maybe people just aren't aware of the opportunity.
Well, now, there's a widespread campaign of promotional work. We're working with the childcare sector. The childcare partnerships have representation from all childcare sectoral organisations, and they're doing a lot of work to promote this, and there's a lot of work about to begin to promote this further.
Okay. I suppose we're in limbo to a certain extent in terms of the delay with the national
Yes.
tax-free childcare scheme, but and not to go over ground again, but you've stated again that there are insufficient funds available within OFM DFM to hold a regional media advertising campaign in relation to the financial assistance that's available to families in relation to childcare. How can there be insufficient funds given the scale of the underspend in the childcare budget?
The resources in the childcare budget, the 12 million executive childcare fund isn't the budget for the childcare strategy. When the childcare strategy is finalised, the budgetary consequences of its actions will have to be assessed, and that budget would necessarily be greater, I suspect, than £12 million. The £12 million was for actions supportive of the development of the childcare strategy. And for its first 2 years, we went out to departments, we asked departments to bid for a share of that £12 million. And then when the childcare strategy first phase was introduced, it was decided to use that funding strategically and to use it to resource the key first actions. The principal key first actions, the most ambitious of the key first actions, is the School Age Childcare Grant Scheme, actions 1, 2 and 5. And that's taking most of the resource, most of that 12 million. Probably more than that 12 million will end up being spent because of the School Age Childcare Grant Scheme.
Sounds like a fairly creative redescription of what the budget was for, but taking it at face value, why was £12 million needed to support development of a strategy?
It's to support actions that would develop childcare in advance of the full childcare strategy. The decision was taken that rather than have a bidding process for shares of that resource, to share it out to departments, because if you have a bidding process, you get varying qualities of applications, some of which meet the criteria but may not be the highest priority for childcare, and instead to use it strategically, to use it for the first phase of the childcare strategy, which prioritised 15 actions based on what people said were the priority areas of childcare.
So we disappointed at the lack of bids from other departments for use of that £12 million then?
No, we wanted to use the resource strategically. I think it's a better use of the resource to use it strategically rather than to have a bidding process in that particular type of fund.
Okay. The Childcare and Family Support NI app has been created. What has been the uptake and the use and feedback in relation to the creation of the app to help families identify provision in their area?
I don't have the figures on hand. I'm sure that Department of Health can provide those, how many hits or whatever have been on there.
Okay. At first glance, it appears to be reasonably helpful, so it might be useful just to hear a bit more in relation to that. Last question, Chair, is that the Strategic Investment Board conducted a business case in relation to, and some research in relation to, what best intervention in the childcare market might look like. Is that a piece of work that would be available to the committee?
No, what the SIB did wasn't a business case so much as an ongoing process of support and assistance, and they provided a number of reports and slides and presentations about where childcare should be going, where policy should be focusing, and it was out of that we established school-age childcare as a key priority area. What SIB was doing was based on consultation and based on the RSM McClure Waters survey of childcare providers and parents who use childcare services. And SIB attended all of our consultation events in 2012, 2013. It wasn't an actual report. I think it was a series of pages of slides and comments, which I believe were provided to the committee.
Okay.
Already been provided to the committee. Certainly I can check if they have.
Okay. Thanks, Chair.
Bronwyn McGann.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for your presentation. Regarding rural childcare, is it possible for the committee to receive a copy of the Rural Childcare Think Piece?
I can check with DARD colleagues and see if they can release that, certainly.
Okay, so was it DARD that initiated that?
Yes, DARD are the department responsible for Key First Action 3, so that was their responsibility, and they produced the think piece.
Okay. Regarding the recommendation coming from DARD that the issue is not about accessibility, it is about affordability, are you across the detail of what evidence was used to come up with that suggestion?
I believe I've some of the detail. My understanding is that it began with the survey, the RSM McClure Waters survey of childcare users, of parents who use childcare
And who are
services,
they?
and childcare providers. Sorry?
Who are they?
RSM McClure Waters were the survey organisation, consultancy that we engaged to carry out a survey.
Sorry, where are they based?
They're based UK-wide, possibly globally, but there was their Belfast office that was engaged to provide this service, and they were working with Ipsos Mori, the survey organisation. So Pauline's a bit more up to speed on that.
Pollsters.
Pardon?
They're pollsters.
And survey researchers too, yes. They do opinion polls.
We love pollsters in politics because they're always accurate. Yes.
Yeah, the research, there was a parent survey, there was a provider survey, but also what RSM McClure Waters did was they actually went to a number of different areas, including rural areas, and carried out case studies. So they interviewed people individually to get a feel for what the issues were in them trying to get childcare, to get affordable childcare, and they teased out some of those issues. So that's where I'm assuming the information has come from for the.
I would be interested to see what your definition is of rural, because usually what you get is anywhere outside of Belfast, and that's not factually correct.
I mean, there were a number of different areas right across Northern Ireland that they went to. I can't remember off the top of my head, but I mean, certainly we can provide that report to you. It's published on our website. So.
At one of the last meetings, I had raised concerns regarding when I had engaged with some DARD officials and they were attending the meetings with the OFM, DFM, they said that there was some question marks around funding going to rural childcare. Would you be able to provide any clarification on that?
I'm not
raised
aware.
it with Dennis McMahon at the last meeting.
I'm not aware of any issues regarding funding going to the Rural Childcare Key First Action, because the Rural Childcare Key First Action was put on hold because of the evidence suggesting that affordability was a bigger issue than availability. So the issue of funding wouldn't have arisen with that particular Key First Action. I should say that that isn't the only rural action that we're doing, because within the School Age Childcare Grant Scheme, some of the applicants, some of the successful applicants, are from rural areas. The figure of 15 of the 50 or so that we got on the first call is in my head, but I would need to look at the actual data to get you definitive figures. But there were successful rural childcare.
Can you do that?
Well, certainly, I can do that.
So there is a rural childcare paper.
Yes, there's a think piece produced by DARD. I can check to see if they're happy to release.
And that follows on from the business case being prepared by the SIB.
Yeah, it follows on from the RSM McClure Waters survey research and some research that DARD had available to them from the Rural Development Programme, I think, from a previous childcare initiative undertaken within the context of the Rural Development Programme.
Right. I'm just looking at minutes of a meeting of the Childcare Strategy Project Board, September 14, which says the business case for potential intervention in the childcare market has now been completed by SIB. As you say, the issue has emerged as affordability rather than accessibility.
I think we're talking about two different reports. There's SIB's work that they did for us, for OFM, DFM, and yes, you're right, there was a separate analysis done by SIB for DARD. You're quite right.
Okay. Alex Maskey.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you both for all the information so far. Just trying to tease out in my own mind the relationship between this issue of affordability versus availability. I mean, I think you made a comment earlier on, Martin, around that people who would be on, parents who would be on tax credits can't claim the tax-free childcare.
That's right.
I know in your paper, and you've commented early on, that there'd be small numbers of people who would currently be on the voucher scheme who may well be disadvantaged
Yes.
for the new scheme because of their new entrants or new applicants. So what would the balance there be? I mean, because I'm trying to work out if it's affordability. Obviously, people who are on tax credits already have an income limit issue to deal with. So I want to open up the whole argument around the legislative consent motion and the policy around this, but it does seem to be a bit of a contradiction.
Now, people who are on tax credits can access working family tax credit support with the costs of childcare, which pays up to 70% of the cost of childcare. So that is a better scheme for people than either vouchers or tax-free childcare. Vouchers and tax-free childcare tend to be focused on relatively affluent families. So relatively affluent families can get on tax-free childcare 20% of the cost of childcare paid for them, and under the voucher scheme it works out at £933 per parent in the scheme per year. But working family tax credit childcare element is 70%, so it covers more of the weekly cost of childcare.
Okay, thank you.
Chris has raised an issue that I want to go back to. Just a couple of things left, Martin. We asked for copies of minutes of this Strategy Management Forum and the Programme Board at the last briefing. On the 7th of November 2014, the Board said health officials advised that the small grants schemes have been suspended due to a lack of funding. Department of Health would like to continue but is unable to do so because the budget's not available. Then they went on to indicate the issue with the media advertising campaign the Deputy Chair raised. 19th of September 2014, Department of Health, Finance and Senior Management Team within the Health and Social Care Board are seeking additional assurance in relation to OFM-DFM's financial commitment to the scheme. Then July 14, the Chair was asked to clarify the funding position in relation to the Children's Strategy and Key First Actions. He advised that the funding table circulated shows the total funding aspirations provided by departments. However, bids will need to be submitted to monitoring rounds as part of the normal public expenditure process. Can you give us some clarity regarding the funding available for
Yes,
Brightstar?
what HSCB wanted was assurance. They wanted assurance that for a multi-annual grant, HSCB are the parent organisation for the childcare partnerships who are delivering our school-age childcare grant scheme. So the money to fund that grant scheme goes somewhat circuitously from OFM-DFM to health, to the healthcare, to the Health and Social Care Board, and then to the partnerships and onward to people who succeed in applying to the grant scheme. They wanted assurance that that resource would be there for 3 years, not just for 1 year. And in the current budgetary climate, it was not immediately possible to give them that assurance, but we were able to give them that in the last couple of months. So now we have assured them that that resource will be available for the next 3 years. That was a big hold-up on the grant scheme for a few weeks.
Final question is regard to our ethnic minority communities. Do they have any particular needs or recommendations or asks in this area?
We are aiming to have all childcare settings that are funded. We want them all to promote diversity, respect for diversity. The childcare strategy, as part of the consultation process, we engage with groups like NICEM. We've taken account of the NICEM Bernardo's research on the childcare needs of ethnic minority communities. So we are aware of them and will reflect them in the final childcare.
Is it the case that ethnic minority communities have highlighted the fact that the strategy doesn't appropriately cater for parents who work shifts?
At present, childcare in general does not make appropriate provision. There is apparently not sufficient provision for parents who work shifts. We weren't aware of that in the first phase. During the consultation process for the first phase, that was not something that came out from the consultations and surveys. Certainly something that we've been made aware of during the co-design process, and therefore it will be reflected in the final version of the childcare strategy.
Okay. Well, thank you both very much. Could I say I think the committee would expect sight of the consultation document in advance of process kicking off. I think that's standard. So, Pauline, Martin, thank you both very much indeed.
Thank you.
Members, can I ask, is there any other business? Not. The meeting is adjourned to Wednesday the 27th at 2 p.m. here in room 30. Thank you very much.